we're working on Holy, Holy, Holy. There are two main techniques that I'd like to practice today. The first is our fourth fingers. Sometimes you'll notice on the A's in this piece, there's a 4 on top, and sometimes there's a 0. When there's a 4, it means we're going to use our fourth finger, and a 0 means open A. Why use both, and why not just pick the better option? Well, it depends on the situation. If our notes are moving upward from the D string towards the A string, we use the open A. If our notes are moving downward from the A string to the D string, then we use the fourth finger. That's not always the case, but it's generally the most helpful thing to do. Now, you can see this in the music even from the very beginning. We open with a D major chord, D, F sharp, A. And here we go to the fourth finger because we're already on the D string. Then we go to the open A because the very next note is B on the A string. Then we go to the fourth finger because the next note is F sharp on the D string. So we want to be ready on the D string. Now we're already there, so we go back to the fourth finger. And now we go over to the A string because our next note is high D, our third finger on the A string. And that pattern continues through the second line as well. So just pay careful attention to when the book marks fourth finger or open A. The book is helpful in marking it out for us because the more you follow along the book here, you'll notice that it's not always marked. So sometimes you just need to use your intuition about whether or not you're going to use an open A or a fourth finger. And it's best to not make the decision based on what's most comfortable, because usually for beginners, sticking with the open A is going to be the easier option. But sometimes the fourth finger is the better option. So don't go with what's easiest, go with what works best for the music. The second thing I'd like to talk about is the difference between our slurs and our hooks. You'll notice, for example, in measure 6, we have slurs. Those are very smooth. But in measure 3, we have hooks. So from the B, there's a slur, but each note has a staccato dot. So we want to make sure that there's a definite stop before you start the next note. These don't need to be extra sharp, extra short, because that doesn't really fit the character of the piece. There are times where you'll be playing pieces that are very staccato, and whenever you play those hooks, they will be very short. But in this case, we just want to make sure there's a definite stop. It doesn't have to be very harsh. But they both need a definite stop. One thing I notice with my students is sometimes they tend to make one staccato of a hook shorter than the other. So for example, you might on your B's go like this, have a short first one, and then the next one will be long. So you'll do this. Make sure they're both short. To practice that, you can just do it really slowly. So just play only the measure with the B hook, and then play your first hook, wait, wait, and then go to the next measure. You can do the same thing on the second line in measure 13, where we go from your high D to your open A. Those are the only two measures with hooks, but make sure that you do make that distinction between the smoothness of the slurs and the shortness of the hooks. A couple more general ideas we want to keep in mind is you'll notice that in the first line, there's the little tiny notes in parentheses between the D and the F sharp. There's a little tiny E. That's just reminding us, make sure the first finger goes down with the second finger. We don't have it dancing up in the air. We want to set them both down because that will help us have better intonation. We've practiced those scales, and it will also make sure that if we need to go back to the E, our first finger is already there, ready to go. The same thing is true when we go from the second finger to the fourth finger. Make sure your third finger goes down first, and then your pinky. And then the last note that I'd like to make is when you're doing the retake, the circle of your bow from the first line to the second line. So you end the first line like this, and you do a retake. Make sure that the bow plants firmly and softly at the frog before you pull the bow again, because sometimes as soon as the bow is airborne, it tends to land harshly. So make sure you place it and then go. So place it a little bit earlier than you would start the note. 1, 2, 3, place, go. And that does it for this one. There's lots of little techniques that we can practice. Our fourth fingers, our hooks, our slurs, our retakes, and making sure that we keep all of our fingers down. It's a nice little piece to have in your repertoire, and make sure that all these little details are important because they add up and you are going to use them in the future on your other pieces. Happy practicing!